So I finally got to see The Boy, and I was pleasantly surprised. So in The Boy, Lauren Cohan, or as you might remember her as Maggie from the Walking Dead series, she plays this young woman named Greta. Now Greta has accepted a job in the UK. I believe she's in the UK. Everyone else around her is British. And she accepted this babysitting job where it turns out the boy that she's babysitting isn't really a boy at all, but a doll.
Allow me to introduce Mr. Hilcher. And this is our son, Brahms.
Yeah, it turns out the parents of this boy lost their son years ago in a fire, and now they see this doll as the embodiment of their dead, long-lost son. So to Greta, this is easy money because it's a doll. She doesn't have to take care of it. She could just live in this house for a while and get paid doing so. Well, this is a horror movie, so basically the doll could possibly be possessed by the spirit of the dead boy. Well, this year we've gotten 2 January horror movies, and many people are like, it's January, horror movies suck in January. And for the most part, people have been pleasantly surprised with The Forest and The Boy. I wasn't too surprised by The Forest. I thought going into it maybe this would be good because everyone is saying, well, it's better than your average January horror movie. But then when I went into it with that expectations, then I just ended up being disappointed with The Forest. So when The Boy was considered better than average January horror movie as well, I just felt, I was let down by The Forest. I'm not going to have high expectations for this one. But I have to say, if there's any January horror movie that's better than most January horror movies this year, it is definitely The Boy. I had a fun time with it. For one, the acting was really good, which almost reminds me of the reasons why I thought that The Woman in Black 2 wasn't as bad as everyone said it was. Because the acting and the subplot romance was actually very effective in Woman in Black 2. Now the acting and the romantic subplot of The Boy isn't as effective as Woman in Black 2, but I thought that the acting was really good and the romance was still really good. Lauren Cohan is really good in this role, and she gives a really great performance. It never feels like she skimps out or feels like, oh, it's just a movie that I can just sort of not worry about acting good. She actually gives it her all throughout the movie. Rupert Evans plays the love interest slash grocery boy, or
well, grocery man.
Lead the way.
grocery man, as he likes to say. You know what? That's another January movie where the love interest is someone who delivers food to the house. Intruders, anyone? But anyway, he was really charming and good, and both of them had a chemistry that I admired. The mother and the father of the boy are only in it for a brief amount of time throughout the movie, mainly just the first part of the movie and then one scene in the movie later on. They were really good as well, and so was the abusive ex-husband. This is another movie where our main hero is running away from something in the past, mainly an abusive ex-husband, very similar to Sinister 2. But unlike all the other ones, it's not over the top and very predictable. You know how the abusive ex-husband slash ex-boyfriend acts in these horror movies? They go over the top and they're just plain vicious. This one is played by Ben Robson, who I think is in the Vikings series. I don't know, I've never watched it, I just looked up what he's been in. And he does look like he could be a Viking with that beard and he's big and muscular. But surprisingly, his performance showed restraint that many other horror movies don't do. Like when he comes back to apologize and say he's different, he's changed, his words really feel genuine, and there's a part of him that feels like, oh, maybe he's not the abusive husband that we think he is, but he definitely conflicts with his actions, which is really nice. It's a very subtle, well, not subtle, but it's more subtle than you would expect, where his actions are a little bit on the aggressive side, even though his words and what he means to do doesn't seem like it. Of course, it's going to lead up to a moment where he does get crazy, but in the meantime, before it gets to that craziness, it doesn't feel as over the top as most horror movies do with this element. So yeah, acting wise it was really good, and even though the story does feel a little done before, it was handled with great care. Speaking of which, there's only 2 jump scenes in the entire movie, both of them being from a dream sequence. The movie showed a lot more restraint in its horror aspects than I would have imagined, especially at the end, where you feel, okay, it's gonna have a final jump scare at the end, just like all the others, and it looks like it's gonna lead up to a jump scare, because you can see it coming, and then they don't do a jump scare. That shows a lot of restraint. Yeah, how many horror movies nowadays doesn't end in a jump scare? Not only that, how many horror movies that get wide releases do not end in a jump scare? It's hard to think of any. Now it does feel like it borrows a lot from the techniques of Annabelle, and even though I didn't like Annabelle all that much, the elements it does borrow from it make sense and are genuinely creepy. Like, the techniques that it uses is the fact that we never really see the doll actually move. Similar to Annabelle, the doll moves later when the camera's not on it, or when the other character is in another room and then comes back and sees the doll's gone. It's not really an all that scary film. In fact, there's a whole section of the movie that really isn't a horror movie. I mean, it has its creepiness to it, and you feel like, oh, maybe this is psychological as she's slowly turning into the mother, as she's thinking this doll is alive when maybe it might not be alive. But it almost treats it like a miracle that, oh my god, this boy's spirit is still in this doll, and this is a miracle. Might have creepy elements to it. It's not really that much of a horror story until the abusive husband comes back in, and then it treads back into the horror. But honestly, I like that part because it focused a little bit more on the romance subplot that was going on, as well as the mysteries of whether this doll's alive or not. And it felt different to your most typical horror movies, where it's scary all throughout, or they try to keep it horror movie throughout. And it made me feel like I was going through the same thought process as our main character. Because as she starts slowly trusting the doll, so did I, thinking, oh, the doll's not as evil as you thought. Maybe the boy's just odd and not really evil. Now, there is a twist in the movie. I didn't see it coming. And it is very jarring because throughout the movie it leads up to you thinking this is all going to be supernatural, and then the twist is not as supernatural as you'd think. And so it's very jarring, and it's like a total 360. And I've heard some people say that once you know the twist, everything doesn't quite make sense. It does cause a few plot holes, but at the same time, I can imagine ways of filling up those plot holes. Like, I can imagine ideas on how this twist actually works, and there are a few clues given throughout that do make sense and do make the twist make sense. So it's not as movie breaking as something like Ouija, but I can understand people not understanding that the twist does actually work. Now, also, once the twist happens, it does feel like a totally different horror movie. Like, I'll give you a comparison of what it feels like. I'll just put spoiler down below just in case, because it could be a little spoilery, but how it feels like a totally different movie in the last act of the film. It's almost like if Annabelle turned into Texas Chainsaw Massacre. That's what it would be like. But anyway, I did really enjoy The Boy. It wasn't all that scary. It was creepy. It was a little bit unique while being cliched. And it showed a lot more restraint than I thought it would. So I'm going to give The Boy 3.5 stars. It's very close to 4, honestly. But I can't quite give it 4. So, have you seen The Boy? What did you think about it? Go ahead and comment. If not, what is your favorite creepy doll horror movie? So let's like Annabelle or Child's Play, or could Poltergeist work because there is a creepy clown doll? Anyway, this is Bruce Gifford, and this was just my opinion.